I'm Shannon.
And I'm Mark.
And this is Dirt Sailor, the podcast. Happy Throat Punch Thursday.
Well, happy Throat Punch Thursday.
How are you doing on this day before the wall of heat hits?
Doing pretty good. If you look at politics across America, local, state, federal, you would think that we live in a banana republic.
100% banana republic. It is, I don't want to say the word crazy because that just seems to not really describe what is going on. Outrageous?
Well, it's outrageous, but it appears from all angles we have a class of people that think they're upper class and better than everyone else, and maybe they are. I don't know because I'm not on that mountain. And then they think
our
of
version
us,
of aristocracy.
Yeah, yes, and they think of us as the classless. Because it's quite obvious to me now that if you thrust yourself into the president in Washington, D.C., this whole thing with the laptop and with all the phone calls and the text and the emails and all the eyewitnesses, and I don't mean that as in an eyeball, I mean as personnel that have been on the ground there that know that our current president and his entire family are corrupt. All they've been doing with this leadership in the Department of Justice, the FBI, CIA, NSA, whoever, name them all. They're just doing a waiting game like you and I have talked about in multiple podcasts, in multiple arenas. They're just waiting for the statute of limitations to run out on everything so they can punt the ball down the road and say, nothing to see here.
Yeah, they get to claim a plea agreement. No, see, we held him to account. Now, 1% of cases go to trial. 99% of cases are pled out. It's very common in our system of justice, or in this case, our system of injustice. But when you get such a sweetheart deal that there's no accountability for all of your other actions. So he pled on tax cheating, and his tax cheating wasn't just hiding some money in the Cayman Islands or trying to hide all of his ill-gotten goods because he didn't do a good enough job at that. He tried to write off money as paying an employee when he was hiring a lady of the night. So all of the money that he spent on his ladies couldn't just be gone, spent. He actually claimed them on his taxes as employee expenses. He tried to claim a certain type of club membership as a golf membership and write off $10,000. He couldn't just pay this membership and let it go. And so it's not just his ill-gotten money, not just the fact that he has this message that was read that talks about strong-arming a Chinese businessman into paying what is essentially looking to be a bribe to both him and his father sitting next to him, the other man in the room. So he gets this money, obviously illegally and through bribery, whatever he has to do to get money, and he runs it through his business. That's not good enough for him. He has to write off prostitutes, ladies of the night, and club memberships that would never count. And do you think that if a Trump child had done that they would get a no jail time agreement?
They would not. I always say the interesting thing or the crazy thing is, or the hard to believe things about what's going on back there is the fact that, do you realize from the IRS whistleblowers, they were not even looking into Hunter Biden.
He just happened to pop up on their radar because of another investigation
having to do with a porn site or a porn operation.
And I think that was part of his golf club membership.
Well, it would be nice if the Department of Justice didn't have a leader that was chosen by the incoming president.
Right. So is the leader who's appointed going to look into the man that appointed him?
Absolutely not, which tells you that it's corrupt, because if it was a legitimate organization, as Garland seems to think it is, I don't believe him for a second, they would actually want to make an example out of Hunter and out of Joe and out of Joe's brother.
Saying nobody is really nobody is above the law.
No one is above the law. The scales of justice should and are equal, and we're going to show you that they're equal to make sure that we don't have people in the future that use their dad's name or their son's name or brother, sister, aunt to increase their wealth, while the American people, which are the ones that elected them to go back there and serve us, don't continue to do this stuff.
And in this particular case, for the threatening message to the Chinese businessman, it actually happened. They obtained a July 30th, 2017 WhatsApp message, and it says, "I am sitting here with my father, and we would like to understand why the commitment made has not been fulfilled." Now, I'm not going to read the rest of it, but he straight up says, "I'm sitting next to my father." Now, note, this is July 30th, 2017. His father is no longer vice president. So during this time, some may say he lacked influence as the sitting VP. But how did we get here? How did we get to the point? Do you think that there was no relationship and no request made any minute before this? That during the entire 8 years of this man's vice presidency, he never talked to his son? Because that was the claim. He never talked to his son about any of the business dealings. So during those 8 years, he never talked to his son, but the minute he's out of office, he's the man sitting right next to him.
I'm sure there's other emails and texts and phone conversations that are recorded, because I guarantee you that the NSA and the CIA, once Biden left office as the VP, they were capturing recordings around the U.S. of every American. So he's wrapped up in this thing somehow. And they probably used some of the key buzz phrases that actually got them not photographed, but recorded more than the common American.
Yeah, well, in this particular case, too, they actually knew about these messages. So there you go, already knowing that this message exists or any other phone calls that may have existed. They knew about it and refused to investigate it. So we have a potential national security issue. To me, a government official who was on the take and willing to sell out Americans is a national security issue. And the fact that he was likely to run for president, again, national security issue. Again, for whatever, the third time, national security issue, and you didn't want to investigate it?
Yes, and he had influence and gravitas even while he was out of office, because from what I understand from a little bit of reading I've done on his book deal and his working at a college, teaching a class, and other items, he made $8 million in a couple, 3 years. So he had some influence. And isn't it interesting that he's been a senator for years, since 1972. The salary range in 1972 was $42,500 for a senator. And as of the time that he got out of office, it was $169,300. So if you mash all those numbers together, you take all the money they donated to charity, they pay their taxes. How are they able to live in two multi-million-dollar homes? They actually purchased the one property for $350,000 and then put a 6,850 square foot house on that lot.
How are they able to just have all of this money lying around to send their kids to very elite schools as well?
And he's made
in addition to...
Yes, and he's made so much money and he's done so well for himself, yet the American taxpayer is paying $500,000 to put a fence. And I just looked at the pictures of it today in the video, a nice fence around his beachfront property.
Not just one that's going to take care of business, but an actual higher end fence.
Very high end brick fencing, nice electric gates.
Did we get to take it back when he's done?
Well, what should happen is that should be held, the note should be held in perpetuity until he's out of office, and then they should have to pay for it, pay it back.
So that's interesting. I understand we need to keep the president secured and we need to make sure that he is protected. And when we have a female president, that she is protected. But why is it that there was such outrage when Trump would go to his own personal property and have to be protected, but Biden goes more often than Trump ever did and not a peep?
That's what I was going to say. Don't go to your property every weekend. Stay at the White House. We're paying for you. Hey, don't travel every weekend to your beachfront home so you can go ride a bike and fall off while you're eating an ice cream.
Yes. And if you really believe that we need to keep the environment safe, the fact that you're going to this beach home every weekend shows just how much you don't care about the environment because you have opportunity to stay put.
Well, as other experts have said, besides us, if fences don't work down on our southern border, what leads him to believe a fence is going to work around his property? And they do have companies called Rent-A-Fence. They could have rented a fence, put it around the property. When he's done,
It goes back.
yes, the fence goes back to the rental place.
And just another area to touch on as far as like what the DOJ did for Hunter Biden. There are whistleblowers that are claiming that the Department of Justice actually tipped off Hunter Biden prior to a search of his storage unit. So even when they were looking into him, even when they were attempting to carry out their duties as federal workers, Hunter Biden was still tipped off by the DOJ. So we do essentially have two tiers of justice here. It reminds me of when they would do these searches for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And there was a requirement that the Iraqi officials be notified before any search of any location for possible WMDs was going to be conducted. And then you would watch these videos of stuff being removed from the facilities. And then the ensuing search would happen.
Right, and it may not have been true WMDs because they say now that there was never any there.
They're saying there was never any there, but then some have said it was everything we already technically knew about, like old mustard gas and just old things, but technically things existed.
It's interesting, though, that you bring up Iraq and WMDs. You know me, I love me some YouTube. I love a lot of special forces guys. I love listening to their stories. And I've been listening to stories of some guys that actually captured Saddam, some that took a lot of the other high-value terrorists out. And we have a lot of special operators that now say that we shouldn't have gone there. It was a waste of blood and treasure, and there were no WMDs there. Well, I'm here to tell you, and I've said a long time ago, listen to me and listen good. This was never about WMDs. This was about a payback for Saddam Hussein having a hit put on the elder Bush's life. And I guarantee you, if you dive into the experts, the CIA guys and all them, they know this. This was not about WMDs. It was about payback for threatening a former U.S. president's life.
I would not doubt that. One of the conspiracy theories that actually surrounds 9/11, and I understand that that is considered Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia and not technically Iraq at the start, but one of the conspiracy theories has to do with one of the Bushes owning a portion of the property at the Twin Towers. And he took it over shortly before 9/11. We're talking several months before, so very short took over the property, bought it, put incredible insurance on it, was mortgaged pretty significantly on it, and then post 9/11 was able to make a ton of money off of the insurance, having only gotten into the deal a mere few months before 9/11. So on the conspiracy of the Bushes being involved in more than just one thing, because that drew us in. We go to Afghanistan, and then we pivot towards Iraq.
Yes, and there's a lot of conspiracies that are just that, and there's a lot that turn out to be very, very true and not conspiracies. There's a lot of conspiracy books about World War II and how we drew Japan into attacking us.
Yes, because it was all of our old ships that happened to be in and around port near Pearl Harbor, and all of our newer vessels were actually away at the time.
It begs for some curiosity here as to, does our government really care about life? Because if you look at how many lives were lost then, you look at how many lives were lost in Vietnam, I mean, just go right down the line. And they say they care about you. They say there's a VA for you. They say there's help, and they are the machine back in D.C. Yet every election cycle, time and time again, we have to dive into, just like the podcast you were just on.
So Drive On Podcast with Scott DeLuzio, he invited me on to speak about my time in the Navy and my resulting surgery and bad surgical outcome. So if you're interested, look for Scott DeLuzio, Drive On Podcast. I am one of his more recent interviewees.
Very nice man, and it was a great interview, by the way.
Oh, thank you. He is an excellent individual. Met him at the podcast movement in Las Vegas. Chance meeting on the tram, and it was just a great timing and good person to hang out with, good person to get to know.
Yeah, and he's another case where he dives into the federal government and the lack of care and the lack of treatment for injuries, for PTSD, for all these scenarios of all the years and all these things that are going on with American men and women when they go to war. Because I say it all the time, even though I was a peacetime sailor, these folks come back broken.
Yes.
You cannot put a human mind in that type of situation and not break something internally. We're not gear setted to do what some of these normal ground forces, the special operators, everyone that goes into that situation has a stressor happen, and they carry that when they come back for the rest of their lives. And our federal government should be in it to win it. If they want to go over to a country and kick the crap out of somebody, then they need to be fully willing to take care of the crap kickers, so to speak, when they come back.
Yes. Instead of having secret wait lists, as we saw in Arizona several years back. In my case now, it's not a secret wait list. I was scheduled to have an appointment, and it was supposed to be a follow-up so I'd get my CT scan read. And that was in February of 2022. And here we are in June, the end of June of 2023. They finally called me to reschedule a couple weeks ago, and it will be in October of 2023. And then they tried to dissuade me from going and finding someone, getting a recommendation for a provider out in town, saying it's going to take longer. Whether or not it will, some days I have more fight than others, and this was just not a fight that I have in me at this moment.
Well, it's just like the case when you talk about Hunter Biden and his family and all these lawyers and officers running the clock out with the statute of limitations. They do the exact same thing with military people, as you and I have talked about in the past, like Agent Orange and things like that.
You run out the clock, which means running out the minutes on people's lives.
Yes.
Need enough people to die, and then maybe they will clear that as a syndrome or a connected disability. For instance, the burn pits. They just started saying that you can apply for the benefits of the burn pits after death, after death, after death. We're several decades out now from even when they were using the burn pits. And I'm surprised they actually started it so soon.
They must have had some really good lawyers and some good organizations backing them up. But doesn't this kind of remind you of like the fuel spills and the water contamination? And even though most of it's just neurological problems, they wait it out and wait it out. Don't blame, don't take responsibility for the actions of what somebody's done. They just try to push it and push it until everybody's gone.
Or given up. Gone or given up. You get them all to go, and then just the few that are left, you might throw them some peanuts. So in some cases, they're even saying, oh, well, we were going to recognize you, and we kind of do recognize you, but we're not going to attach any money to it. We're not going to attach any medical to it. We're just going to recognize that there was a wrongdoing too. Or they'll, in their budget negotiations that they do in Congress, they'll try to get the spending bill authorized, but then if they can't, the negotiation of the deal is to cut the money from it. So they still recognize that there's an issue. They just don't do anything about it.
And that's why a book by Jocko Willink is so good. Extreme Ownership. Everybody in D.C., every state across the land, every local municipality should be required to read it, know it, live by it, and if they make a mistake, be punished by it as well. That's the problem. There's no accountability for anybody's actions.
There's zero accountability. And some are saying that the DOJ has come out and said that the U.S. attorney was free to bring charges against Hunter Biden on his failure to pay the $8.3 million in income, pay taxes on the $8.3 million in income that he had. But then the whistleblowers come out and say, no, the career officials would try to bring charges, and then up the chain of command, they would get told no. So they just try to lie and say, oh yeah, they were free to bring charges. They were free to do their job. When the reality is every federal person has somebody above them to answer to. And ultimately, that is Merrick Garland if you're in the DOJ. And so it goes all the way up. And if it's something big enough, you know it's going to go all the way up. They are not going to insulate and take 100% responsibility for all of these things if they're not an appointed official.
Right. And Merrick Garland still has an axe to grind for one particular party over the other.
Because he was appointed to be a Supreme Court justice, if I remember correctly,
Yes.
and the Republicans said no dice, and they refused to vote on him. He was appointed under Obama. Oh, look, everybody just comes back around. Supreme Court justice nominee now is the DOJ head, the Attorney General. He's not going to go after his boss. He's not going to go after the one that kept him in the big name slots. So don't say that these people are free to bring charges when they absolutely are not.
Nope, he's one that should be impeached. Actually, all the cabinet level members that are making major mistakes right now should all be impeached or censured or whatever you can legally do to them from the congressional side of things, because they're all a failure. They're throwing this country right in a commode.
Yes, they are. So something that I need to do a little more research on, and perhaps some of our listeners know this and can reach out and message us, that would be great. When a president and vice president, when the big guys, big gals get in there, it is my understanding that they get very secure phones. So that way they can't be hacked, and anything on those phones, somebody just can't get into them. I don't even think they're allowed to have iPhones because of some of the technology or things that can happen. It is my understanding that when you become president, you pretty much just have everything go through secretaries, specific phone numbers. You have only, it's very secure is what I'm trying to say. Same with the vice president. I am sure other high level officials have this too. But apparently, when he was vice president, Joe Biden had a secret global cell phone that was paid for by Hunter Biden's business, according to the Government Accountability Institute. There's an individual at the Government Accountability Institute who has documented the Biden family's alleged multiple financiers directly tied to the CCP, intelligence officials with Hunter during and after the Obama administration. So anyway, they've jumped into it, and apparently there was a global phone that was serviced through AT&T, and it was $300 a month, and it could access someone anywhere in the world. And the claim is that Hunter Biden paid for this to give to his dad so he could access him all the time when he was VP.
Well, so he could say the big guy is right next to me by phone.
So the whole big guy is right next to me. Some are saying that just because he said his dad's there on a text message doesn't mean that he was actually there. And I agree. But apparently they dove into the pictures on his laptop with the timestamp of the July 30th. And he was in Delaware at his dad's house.
At his dad's house. Yes.
At the time.
So we know these guys are corrupt. And you know what kind of influence he had when he left the office of vice president? He was the mafia don that he was while he was in office as vice president, because nobody puts together 20-some LLCs and then gives money to your granddaughter, your niece, and all them as a free gift through that means. They will write a check. They'll buy you savings bonds. If they're going to do something for you, they're going to do it on the up and up, not as crooked as they've planned to do it or managed to do it.
So another topic that we've had on this show that I do want to touch, it's also with Hunter Biden, is the Hunter Biden laptop scandal. So we had all of these intelligence officials that signed on to the letter that said that it was Russian disinformation. It turns out that the FBI had actually authenticated the laptop back in 2019. And so the government has known not just about the laptop, but about the authenticity of the laptop well before other government officials came out and said it's Russian disinformation.
And isn't it interesting how popular Rudy Giuliani was as a leader in New York during 9/11? And then once he started bringing all these things out, how everybody poo-pooed him. And now, what's the name of the organization that had almost called them vending machines, the voting machines?
Dominion?
Yes. Is now suing him for hundreds of millions of dollars. These people are not going to be happy until everyone that's looked at these conspiracy theories and found out and figured out that they're actually real, they're not going to stop until they wreck them. They're going to spend every dime they can to destroy people.
100%.
But there's no cheating in voting. Sorry, it doesn't happen.
Never has happened. All of the people that have been arrested for it, it hasn't happened either. All the prosecutions, it hasn't happened either. And speaking of the voting, I thought it was funny that they would tell us that having suitcases full of votes was just normal business, that you would keep them under some folding tables with little skirts around them, unsecured all day. I just found that really interesting, because you would think that there would have to be some other form of security, that when you say, okay, once a person handed them over and we're going to count them and you bundle them together, that they're kept under lock and key. But instead, the most secure thing they could do, which was normal everyday votingness, was to have suitcases full of votes just under folding tables.
Well, they bought those suitcases at Walmart, so they were very secure. So here, let me add on to your voting, non-voting, corrupt, not corrupt issues. So the House has a weaponization committee, and they're now finding that the Biden administration colluded with big tech and facilitated the censorship of Americans. And it started when? Prior to the 2020 election and the 2022 midterms.
If you look at the Twitter files, a lot of the releases that happened out of there, you would see all different kinds of people trying to get posts censored. And Mark Zuckerberg has even come out and said that the consequence of all of this censorship and trying to only let the truth out was to actually censor the truth.
Well, I guess CISA is a government agency.
Yes.
So the committee led by Chairman Jim Jordan obtained non-public documents, which lawmakers say reveal CISA expanded its mission to surveil American speech on social media, colluded with big tech and government-funded third parties to censor by proxy and tried to hide its plainly unconstitutional activities from the public. So maybe you don't have vote changing by a machine, but you have vote changing and manipulation by censorship.
Right, because if you censor what ultimately turns out to be the truth, then people are making decisions based on lies that they're told is in fact the truth. So if you're hearing lies all day and eventually you take them for truth, maybe at first you have some skepticism, but then you start to see it everywhere and you start to take it for truth, you feel that you're voting based on truth. So if the lie is big enough, I know there's been dirty politics for generations and generations, but on this massive scale, that they are allowed to not just take down the sign that somebody put in the public square, but stop them from ever speaking in the future. How are we not looking at that as a voter issue?
That is correct. So did you get invited to the White House state dinner?
No, Joe Biden doesn't recognize me as his daughter. So apparently I don't warrant an invite.
No stocking on the fireplace at Christmas then?
No.
So if, as Hunter Biden's attorney stated in the news the last few days, that anything that Hunter has said or done in the past is a direct result of his drug addiction. So then...
Yes, that's what he came out and said, that basically nothing to see here, all is forgiven. He was a drug addict.
Okay, so why did he go to the state dinner? Why was he invited?
Because he's the son of the president, and you can't question that. If you listen to Karine Jean-Pierre, she will say every time Hunter Biden is brought up that that's his son and she's not going to talk about the family. That's their excuse. Even when they say, okay, there's this criminal action that's publicly been released, can we talk about it? No. Why was he invited to go rub elbows with the head of the DOJ, Attorney General Merrick Garland, when he is currently being prosecuted and has a federal plea deal? That's family. We're not going to talk about it.
So I wonder how they looked at that tax evasion, which he pled guilty to 2 misdemeanor counts of willful failure to pay federal income tax. When I could see it if you were a common citizen that, worked for O'Reilly Auto Parts and made $70,000 a year as a manager, if that's even plausible, and you didn't pay your taxes. But when he's a known person that used shell companies, that was tied to a prostitution ring, that was using drugs that are very illegal.
Federally illegal?
Yes.
Has video evidence of his illegal drug usage, has other evidence of his not paying taxes, not just them finding out that he was writing stuff off, but him also trying to hide. That's the willful part, right? He's saying people are employees that weren't. He's saying that he had a golf club membership that he didn't. It wasn't just that he was not paying his taxes. He was actually involving other people because he claims some of these women as employees.
Well, and you wonder why people of color get so upset when they get prosecuted to the full extent of the law and do multiple years in prison or multiple thousands of dollars in fines. And I believe one that spent time in prison was an actor by the name of Wesley Snipes
Yes, he did.
for the same very thing, right? And I believe it was, I want to say 1 to 4 years.
He did quite a bit of time, if I
did.
do.
Oh, this guy right here should get life in prison. A Democrat state senator arrested after admitting to keying a car with Biden sucks sticker on it. That's a life sentence right there.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting that
Oh, so
they would stoop so low as to key a car.
Yes. This police chief has stated that no one is above the law.
Oh, well, some people are actually held. So you brought up some of the individuals who failed to pay their taxes. So there's a rapper, Busta Rhymes. You may or may not know him. Has owed the IRS north of $750,000, and that's in unpaid federal taxes. So he's getting hit with liens for his failure to pay. MC Hammer owes $1.4 million, and that was for a 1996 tax delinquency, so he ended up filing for bankruptcy on that. Lil Wayne, Lauryn Hill, she did 3 months in prison for failing to pay about $1 million. So Lauryn Hill, 3 months. Fat Joe turned himself into federal custody. He had to do the same, and he spent 4 months in prison after failing to pay over $1 million to the federal government. Ja Rule served 2 years but that was weapons and tax evasion convictions. Now, don't we also have a weapons issue for Mr. Hunter Biden?
He is not going to be charged with that.
He gets to do a diversion program because he was a poor, drug-addicted soul.
So let's talk about that, but let me bring this up first. So on April 24th, 2008, Wesley Snipes was sentenced to 3 years in prison for willful failure to file federal income tax returns under 26 U.S.C. 7203.
Okay, but the difference is it is a bigger crime to fail to file your taxes than it is to not pay your taxes. So if you're going to not do one of the two, make sure you file your taxes, because that's crime if you don't, and then just don't pay your taxes and you can work on the rest of that.
Right. Well, here's the interesting thing about that, and I agree with that, and I understand that, punishments are supposed to increase with the severity of the crime. But he was taught by somebody and was under one of the beliefs that he could barter this away, and that as long as he did what you would call quid pro quo, this for that, the federal government was not entitled to any of his money. Believe it or not, that was part of his mindset. It may have been hogwash or fake, but I do recall that was one of his defense mechanisms.
So Hunter Biden's willful failure is only $200,000. All of his write-offs. Now, we do have a president, Joe Biden, I believe Kamala Harris has said it, Nancy Pelosi has said it, Bernie Sanders has said it, Elizabeth Warren has said it, AOC has said it, that those millionaires and billionaires need to pay their fair share. Where are all those other people calling out the fact that Hunter Biden was attempting to circumvent paying his fair share?
Because it's who you are. If you're on the right side of the scale, you get protected. If you're on the left side of the scale, you get hammered. So I didn't realize Martha Stewart did 5 months in prison.
Hers was for insider
trading.
But they ultimately got her on 1001, lying to the feds.
Lies.
Lie. 18 U.S.C. 1001. If they can't get you any other way, they'll likely get you that way.
Just like the UCMJ in the military, there's one cover-all.
Well, especially for officers, conduct unbecoming of an officer. Gotta love that one. The catch-all. Well, we didn't really catch you doing anything wrong, but you're still wrong, no matter what you say.
Yes, and they can make up a lot of stuff for people that try to be honest, but just get caught up in things, and they don't set up real ethics rules for themselves are not held accountable for them.
Nope. And you know who's not held accountable to the environment and to transportation?
Pete Buttigieg.
Pete Buttigieg. So we had that fake attempt by Pete Buttigieg to pretend he cycles into work. So they had him in the back of the SUV with all of his people, and then he was so far from his office. Then they get him out, and he's getting the bicycle out of the back of the SUV so he can hop on and pretend he rides to work. And that's how he was supposed to be green. And we have him talking about all of this equity and all, everything is wrong with our system. But did you know that he still likes to use private jets?
He does, and it's pretty expensive.
It is. And so far, we've had individuals on both sides of the aisle who have used the private jets they call it for work-related reasons. And then they calculate how much an economy ticket would have been if they do anything personal, and they reimburse at an economy ticket rate, even though a private jet is clearly not an economy ticket worthy situation. But aside from that, they have him making 18 flights so far. It says Pete Buttigieg last year had flown 18 times while in office, so then you have more flying this year. He has visited Florida, Ohio, New Hampshire, and instead of using commercial jets and being economical and keeping taxpayer money in mind, he uses private jets. They try to say, oh, well, as long as it is within so much money, we're doing the right thing for the government spending and for the taxpayers, which I don't understand, because private jets spew all of that nasty greenhouse gas and wreck the environment and do all of that. And it's only problematic if it's the wrong person. Because when Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao under Trump flew 7 times in 2017, she was heavily criticized. And then you have the Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price did it. He ended up resigning after taking 26 jet flights in 2017.
They need to only utilize those private jets when they're going to an emergency scene and there's no other means of transportation.
And all of these people who say they are all about green energy need to knock it off 100% of the time. Technically, they all need to knock it off, but I just find it really interesting that people who espouse the terribleness of people having gas-powered cars and mowers and blowers would then go flying private jets and somehow think that they're still doing the right thing.
You know who actually practices what he preaches?
Who's that?
Is the latest Kennedy that's running for president.
RFK?
Robert
Jr.
Jr. Yes. And I will tell you right here, if he didn't have the disease that he has that has impaired part of his speech, because people lose patience when people stutter and when they can't get their position out quick enough, even though he can articulate it very well. If you sit and listen to him, he would swat Joe pretty well. And I think he still has the opportunity. Unfortunately, you have the main media outlets that don't want a Kennedy. They don't want him to beat Biden because they can't push him around. So they're using every vernacular you can think of, that he's a nut, he's an anti-vaxxer, he thinks vaccines, even way prior to COVID, are bad. It's causing a lot of issues with kids. And I don't know how much of what he says is factual, but apparently he does a lot of research. And he has a lot of, here's a word for you, science behind him. And if you now look at the empirical data on the most recent vaccinations, there's a lot of truth to what he has to say. Do some of the side effects affect a lot? No. But when you take the sum total of the parts and add them all up, it's a pretty large number. The consequence is pretty heavy too. Because there's another area where the federal government and these folks that do these vaccinations don't care. Because if it's your kid and it's only 1 out of 100,000 or 1 out of 1,000,000, it's still your kid.
One kid too many.
It is one too many.
And you look at a lot of what they're doing. Okay, so who does the study? The company that wants the approval does the study. So they have a vested interest in the outcome of the studies. Who's doling out the money? The federal government is helping to dole out contracts to look into certain things. They have a vested interest in things working in their favor. And so if you look at even COVID and the COVID shots, our government had a vested interest because they were spending a lot of money to get an outcome. What do you think would have happened if they came out and said it just can't be done after billions of dollars were spent? Or the price is too high to pay? People would not take the shot, or a shot wouldn't have been produced. You have these companies that claim that, oh yeah, we'll do our part, we'll do a solid for the United States and for the world, and we'll manufacture and invest in these too. Well, they invested taxpayer dollars into this, and now they get to claim ownership and keep making the COVID shot, and the government is going to make it required. You have these pharmaceutical billionaires now because their companies were the ones picked and they participated. COVID made billionaires out of some of these pharmaceutical individuals.
You know what else it did?
What did it do?
It raised the value of Biden's beachfront property by over $750,000 in a 2-year period, because that's when people were not allowed to travel with others in groups. So the Airbnb thing started becoming something. So it allowed all the properties in his general vicinity to really spike in value. Not my words, just repeating what I read.
Crazy times. So one other thing came out really big with our Trump-Russia collusion pusher. So Adam Schiff was not censured with money attached for his role in pushing Trump-Russia collusion and actively lying in the investigations. But he was censured, Republicans voting only because all Democrats voted no, for his without the money attached. So he was censured by the House of Representatives. But then during some testimony that was given by Durham in the House Judiciary Committee, Schiff referenced a Trump Tower meeting between Trump Jr. and Russian individuals prior to the 2016 election that this lawmaker, Schiff, claimed constituted a crime. And so he said, "Are you aware, Mr. Durham, that Mueller's and congressional investigations also revealed that Don Jr. was informed that a Russian official was offering the Trump campaign very high level and sensitive information that would be incriminating of Hillary Clinton?" And Durham responded, "Sure, people get phone calls all the time from individuals who claim to have information like that."
Don't they, Adam Schiff?
All the time. And so then he responds, "Really? The son of a presidential candidate gets calls all the time from a foreign government offering dirt on their opponent? Is that what you're saying?" And his response was, "I don't think this is unique in your experience."
It's because Schiff is a fake. I think he's a Russian operative, to be quite honest with you.
Chinese. He's a Chinese
CCP.
CCP all the way. Maybe that's also Russian because they're kind of colluding with each other.
So I think about 25 or 20 out of 100 podcasts, I've made the statement that I'm still confused about the transgender sporting thing and what's going on with the kids in schools and puberty blockers, and just package all that up into one neat little bundle. I now hear that there's a New Jersey governor Phil Murphy. He's suing 3 school districts.
What is he suing them for?
Because they've adopted policies to tell parents if their children show signs of changing their gender identity.
So he doesn't want the parents to be informed of any changes to gender identity?
They've come out and said that it's very detrimental to the kids if the parents are in the know, and it's really none of their business. They're basically wards of the state, and they're on loan to these parents to raise them up.
Well, that's one thing that they've tried to say, even up to Joe Biden. He says that these are our children. How many times have you heard teachers say that they're the ones to make the decisions. They're the ones that see your kids every day, so therefore they should be the only deciding factor in anything to do with your kid.
Well, I would bet a bulk of those teachers don't have that great of a home life either, and it's none of their business. What their business is to do what? It's to teach them
Well,
reading,
it's supposed to be reading,
writing,
arithmetic. And we've gotten away from that. And we are teaching them to be social justice warriors. We're not teaching them to read. Reading is down. We're not teaching them to do math. Mathematics is the worst it's been in how many years? Who knows that they can write? Definitely can't do cursive. But we're not just poorly educating them. We're putting them in a worse position than they were in had they been in the school system 2 decades ago.
Well, I'm just glad that, like a father and a mother stated at a school board meeting, that they're going to take their kids out of public school and put them into private school. Because it's not an administration's responsibility. Because let me tell you what, when that kid, the boy or girl, does their thing in flip-flops, and then they realize, because the stats say that almost 90% or more of ones that do it 100% regret it, and then there's no going back.
So there is no going back. If you start taking puberty blockers, if you have the surgeries, you are going to end up in a position where you're always going to need pharmaceutical intervention for the rest of your life. If you go too far, you're not going to have the ability to regulate yourself anymore.
Well, I'm sorry. A lot of those drugs that they're using or trying to use are actually designed or were originally designed for pedophiles.
Castrating.
Yes.
They were designed for castrating.
Yes.
So when we say don't castrate our children, they're like, oh, you're just being silly. No, that's what they were designed for.
100%.
And then they tell parents to shut up and go away. And they wonder why the parents are standing up for their children. You get down in Southern California where the Armenian community tries to stand up for their kids, and Antifa shows up to try and assault and take over. And anytime you try to say, no, this is not for my child, they want to say, no, you're required to raise your child the way I want them raised, whoever the other I is, whether it's a government official or not. California is looking at removing kids from their homes if they don't have gender affirmation by the parents. You're telling me they're better off in the foster system? Last time I checked, you had too many foster kids, not enough people to take in the foster kids. You have kids who end up sleeping on tables in offices because they still don't have enough placements for them. You have kids who are getting assaulted, but if mommy and daddy don't say, yes, you're a boy, or yes, you're a girl, you're going to get them removed, and they will be better off in a group home.
And that's basically what this lawsuit states, that outing these students against their will poses serious mental health risks, threatens physical harm to students, including risking increased suicides, decreases the likelihood students will seek support. It shirks the district's obligation to create a safe and supportive learning environment. And that dives into, you think that doing what they're wanting to do to the kids isn't detrimental to their mental health?
They're assuming that in 100% of the cases of somebody who says I'm the opposite gender, that there is nothing else in their life that's going on that could potentially lead them to this path that is also wrong for them. That you're not allowed to explore, you're not allowed to seek any care that does not and it like automatically affirm their statements. We call it gender affirming care, not gender exploratory care, not find yourself care, not let's see what the doctor says care, gender affirming care. And it requires even medical professionals to affirm the diagnosis of a minor who has never been to medical school, never taken a psychology class, nothing, that they feel wonky. They saw something on social media, so it must be this thing. This is how I'm going to do it, period.
Yeah, another TikTok challenge.
And look at how big the alphabet soup is getting. LGBTQIA to MBNA, MAP plus, LMNOP.
See, and I just don't get that either. I would think that, we got to run out of isms here pretty soon and conversions to people, because there was just a professor that was kicked out of school because he talked about
there are only two genders, male and female, X and Y. And by the way, he was a biology professor. College biology professor.
someone expert in the field.
Lost their job because they said there was X and Y chromosome.
Expert in his field.
Yes. And so a lot of what I look into on some of the gender-related issues are not gender-related issues. It is how you choose to outwardly display yourself. And so we've been doing this for many generations, whether it's dyeing our hair, whether it's getting piercings, it's getting tattoos, it's the clothes that we wear. We have people, we used to call it the goth phase. If it was a phase, maybe you never got out of it, and that's fine that you're goth and you wear all black or dark items. Or maybe you want to show everybody your shiny, bubbly, amazing personality, and you do that by wearing glitter, pink, and just happy colors, what you consider happy colors. It doesn't change your gender. And a part of your identity is your outward appearance and who you present to other people. And sometimes that's internalized too, the happy person, the sad person, the angry person, the mad person, that we all have ways that we're perceived. And in fact, one time when we had limited things to do, one day when I was in the Navy, this one gal went around assessing everybody. And she was just taking a read after us being in class so many weeks with each other. And she's going around and pointing to each person and saying, like, you're going to do, I see you doing this, that, or the other thing. You're going to do your 3 years. And as soon as your tour is up, you are getting out and you're going to whatever, and she's just going around, and we're all enlisted. And she gets to me and she said, yeah, you should be an officer. I don't see why you're enlisted. And then that was it. Well, my plan at the time, before everything went wrong for me, was actually to apply to the Seaman to Admiral program to become an officer. So I would say she had a good read on the situation. I never told her that, but apparently she just looked at me and said, you're going to be an officer, which also means that I can't do my job very well. Just kidding. But you take a certain read on people. You have certain personalities. You have people who want to dress in certain ways, and it doesn't change their gender. It doesn't change with whom they enjoy the company of. So why is it that we're required now to go around affirming everybody, even if somebody else who knows them very well says, this doesn't sound like you?
Speechless. That rarely happens. Like I've said, I don't know if I'll ever get a grasp on this whole movement right now. And maybe it's a product of my age or older environment, or just how easily things confuse me.
So my difficulties are coming in where it is being, I know people talk about it, stop shoving it down my throat. But we have, okay, let's just take a pride parade. You have pride in yourself. I get that. You have a parade. Okay. So you dress up how you want to dress up. Maybe you carry the rainbow flag. Maybe you carry a flag that says pride or other things. We see, what are those things? Floats going down the road, however you want to show. But where I have a problem is people calling it family friendly. And then you have the naked bicyclist, or you have a guy twerking in his underwear at children. And the underwear is very loose fitting, so you're shaking everything at children. I have a problem with. You say there's nothing wrong with Drag Queen Story Hour, and then we see the pictures or videos of people dressed up with their booties hanging out or their members hanging out. And you're calling that child friendly. And then we go into the other avenue is not pride related, but going into women's sports, where you're saying that women need to make space for men who wish to say that they are now women and take over their sport. That's also you're not LGBTQIA friendly unless you allow the T, so transgender, to take over the biological woman's sport. We hardly hear about it in reverse. Can it happen? Yes, there's a boxer that transitioned from female to male who then went pro and is apparently had some good bouts. Does it happen? Yes, I'm not saying it never happens. But then you have cases where you're supposed to, even as a high school student, go into a locker room and change in front of the person who's saying their member is now the opposite. I don't know how detailed I want to get on the podcast, so I am trying to not say it. But basically, if you look at a male body and say all of this is now a female body, sprinkle some, magic fairy dust, and all I'm supposed to say is, okay, now you're telling me male is female, so I should just be comfortable with any man who wants to come in, call himself a woman, and undress in front of me in any locker room situation, because it's happened in public places, but workout facilities and medical facilities where women are just told, this man is calling his body a woman's body, so you just have to deal with it. And kids are allowed in those spaces in some cases, or under 18 spaces.
So I think a lot of that should be unacceptable. And I believe that a lot of these pride parades, the new ones, there's a militant part of them that does what you just described. And there's potentially others that are there just to have their parade and enjoy themselves and promote themselves.
And those people are being taken over, as you just said, by militant individuals. It's not the whole community. There are many good members of many different communities. So that is also something to consider, not saying it as to everyone as a whole. We can't just say this is the box. But have we done that in our society? Said there are certain boxes that we all have to fit into? Yes. Growing up, doing PE in high school, freshman PE included having to do swimming. So now that you're coated in chlorine, you have to go take a shower before you go on to your next lesson, next class. And it is in a locker room where all of the showers are open. All of the changing facilities are open. And they may have had one or two like private toilets or shower changing locations. But if you're trying to get 50 or 80 kids, depending on how big your PE class is, or in some cases, I'm sure their classes are bigger. There was 2 in my high school. There was no way everybody could wait in line and change. So the choice was be on time to class, change, shower in front of everybody else, or be late to class and get in trouble, all of that. So which one are you going to choose?
I'm going to be late to class. Yeah, I remember the first time I saw showers like that too in junior high. I thought, wow, man, those are pretty cool looking showers. Well, wait a minute. They're all open. Then all the stalls had no doors on them. Hey, you can't even do your business in the bathroom. All the stalls are open.
Yep. And maybe part of our society is doing individual stalls, but guess what? All of those are government-run facilities. You think the money's going to exist to put up individual stalls and maintain them all?
No.
Those are government run. That's your taxpayer dollars at work is forcing everyone to openly undress. In other cultures, in other locations, it is quite normal. They will have female facilities, male facilities. I know when I was in Japan as a foreign exchange student, I would go to onsens, and the women's onsens, everybody naked. That was just very normal. And I had a host sister one time who wanted to go to the outside onsen, which was also like covered mostly, but it was outside. My host mom did not want to go. So she asked if I could take her since at the time I was 18. So they said, yeah, sure. So I went with my sister to the outside, host sister to the outside onsen. All around women, it gets totally normalized. But if there were men there, no way. No way. You have little girls and adult women, and then you just want to say everybody in the world is just going to be naked together and happy. Please tell me where in society that is normal. Because if we're willing to open up our changing facilities, why not open up our entire lives? Why there would never be any more indecency issues.
One big nudist colony.
Yeah, no more indecency issues because everybody gets to say it's just a body. You have no right to privacy.
Well, the way we're spied on, I think the federal government feels we are not.
They've already seen all of our naked pictures.
They've already taken care of that.
Yeah, every time you're on the toilet, they're like, hey, Mark's on the toilet again.
Just like the very first time a smart TV came out. And I was passing through my living room with the TV off, and it turned on. And I swear the reflection in the TV flipped. So I just went to bed and I told a coworker, we're being spied on. And I was told I was a nut. Well, I actually just read a story today that the federal government through the NSA and them have been using televisions like that for years.
So I understand we all put these devices in our house. I'm guilty of it at one point in time or another. So your Amazon devices, they have been used in court cases, actually in a murder trial, because it was recording, unfortunately, while a lady was murdered. Now, it wasn't that she said, hey, Amazon device, call 911. They just found it was recording. And I've noticed sometimes I don't even say, hey, Amazon device, but then all of a sudden it's responding to something I never said. And most recently, my husband and I were standing next to said device and made mention that the responses were getting worse. That we would say either to set a timer or to add this to a shopping list or whatever. And it seemed like it had been going downhill, not understanding us more and more and more. So we just said, gosh, it just seems like it's getting worse. The next day, I had an email requesting that I review how well my device is understanding me. The next day. And I understand that's not government, but they are turning all of that over to the government. We talked about it last week on the podcast where they are using all of this gleaned data. They're buying it up. Our data is getting sold. So they are still spying. Even when they aren't doing it, they're buying it. Now, don't get me wrong, they're still doing it, but they're buying all of the spied on stuff.
Yes, they're doing it by third party. But I knew, conspiracy theory, I knew when they were building that over 1 million square foot warehouse in Utah, and it was only going to have 35 employees, that was going to be an NSA storage site.
Gotta store the information.
Man, was I right.
You were right. So a follow-up to a topic we've discussed before, Loudoun County school official has been found not guilty of perjuring himself in the district sexual assault probe. So the Loudoun County Public Schools spokesman accused of perjuring himself during the high-profile investigation into 2 sexual assaults was acquitted by a jury a week ago. And the Virginia Special Grand Jury's probe commissioned by Attorney General Jason Myers under the guidance of Governor Glenn Youngkin, looked into this gentleman for perjuring, alleging that he lied about his awareness of the district's first sexual assault incident when it happened in May of 2021. What is interesting about some of this is that the witnesses started changing their story to I don't recalls and I don't remembers, so they didn't have that solid testimony against him anymore. But you can go and lie and say you knew nothing of these sexual assaults, and you're fine.
Fits right in with the rest of things that are happening around the country.
Yeah, they had a gender fluid individual who wore skirts who was allowed to use the girls' restroom, assault at one school, be allowed to transfer to another school, and then assaulted another girl in a classroom. And then all of the adults involved get to lie about it and get away with it because Title IX does not apply. Women and girls don't need safe spaces. If men would like to take over the women's space, we are just required to give it up. And when something happens, they get to lie about it. They get to lie at public hearings. When the dad stands up for his daughter, he gets arrested because they get to lie to the public and say nothing ever happened. And the dad stands up and says it happened to my daughter, but he's out of order and he gets handcuffed and dragged out and they want to go after him. But the adults that help to hide this assaulter, they get to go on with their day.
Scot-free. Sum total of the parts, just like vaccinations when they go awry, even if it's one kid, it's too many. And you know who Durham is?
Yes, we just talked a little bit about him and Adam and his responses to Adam Schiff. That Durham?
Yes, yeah. Same Durham. Do you know why it took him so long to come out with his report?
Why did it take him so long? I don't know.
Well, the FBI did a document dump when he started requesting files, and they sent him 6,800,000 documents.
Oh, so they tried to drown him so he can't possibly. So if I say I want this one record, and you're like, yeah, sure, one, here's $1 million. Oh, you want 2 records? Here's $2 million. No, you want 6? Here's $6 million.
Well, the interesting thing, yes, is when these experts, and I'll call him an expert, when they do their investigations, they have power, but they don't have power. So when the grand jury tries to subpoena people, it doesn't carry a lot of weight. So do you remember Peter Strzok?
Yes, I do.
Andrew McCabe?
Yes, I do.
Comey?
I do.
And a handful of others. They all refused to cooperate with him. He did not interview a single one of them. The major players in this whole Russia collusion and all this other crud that was going on at the FBI, he did not interview a single one of them.
And if I remember correctly, when they were looking into Hillary Clinton way back in the day for doing nothing wrong and bleach spitting nothing, she was allowed to give her terms of being interviewed for her non-crimes. So even if you do end up interviewing, she was allowed to give terms and conditions.
Well, yes, you could tell what an arrogant, you know what she was. Look at when she had to speak before a committee over Benghazi. What did she say when they asked her about the deaths of the ambassador and others? What does it matter anyway? What difference does it make?
There's just some lives of some guys. Some guys died. Just like, wasn't that Ilhan Omar? Some guys did something. 9/11.
Just some guys.
And now we have a second 9/11, and it's just, what does it matter? What does it matter anyway? Their lives aren't worth it. So let's talk about making everything equitable. Heard a lot about equity and making things equitable.
Fair and equitable.
Is it fair to pay to hook up to PG&E or any electric company solely based on your income?
No.
So California passed a law, AB 205, and it is an attempt to get utilities to adopt a fixed price, which is based on household income. And this is to fund the wires, poles, meters, and customer service. This is not to do with your actual rate per each kilowatt hour or your usage fee. So the claim is that Pacific Gas and Electric, San Diego Gas and Electric, and Southern California Edison proposed their implementation, because they have to propose what they're going to do to the California Utilities Commission, Public Utilities Commission, to implement a fixed charge to pay for the transformation of the state's electricity infrastructure. And it varies by income, but the rate for each kilowatt hour of electricity usage fee says it would decline for everyone. So they're saying that this fixed fee would go up, but the cost of the kilowatt hour would go down.
Sure, it will.
Do you believe it? Do you believe that the kilowatt fee is going to go down? So each one is proposing their own fees. They're not all the same. PG&E, the one that would affect us, it says it could be as low as $15, but no greater than $30, and this is per month. For low income, moderate income would pay $51. And for customers in the top 25% of earners, so now we're not talking about the top 1% anymore, but the top 25% of earners, it would be $92 a month. Assuming the electricity rates actually stay the same, the estimate, and PG&E's estimates are always off, but their estimate is that the lowest income would receive a 21% bill reduction. Other lower income customers would receive an 8% cut. Moderate income customers would receive a 6% cut, and high income customers would see bills increase by 24%.
So how's all this voodoo magic working for the homeless in California? All the hundreds of billions of dollars we spent took care of that problem, right?
It did. Progressive taxes at the are going to work. So now they didn't work, so let's try this new system of applying a progressive system, and then magically we'll fix everything, because every other law that we put on the books, every other money spent, it's all worked. So clearly this is going to work.
Well, I don't look at the bills anymore with PG&E or cell phones because they're no longer paper. They're electronic and online. So my better half looks at them. Do you ever look at a phone bill from AT&T or Verizon and see all the little carve-outs, the extra charges for the deaf, for the homeless, for people that make under $20,000 a year, for people that make under 40, for people that make over 40, for people that don't have an income, we still provide them with a place to stay, on and on and on.
All of our little tinies.
This
yep.
is just another scheme to separate people from their hard-earned cash, and it will not work because they'll take it just like they did with all the transmission lines that were not maintained and caused this big forest fire. The money will go into retirement coffers. It'll go to executive bonuses and salaries. It'll go to fund elections through campaign contributions. It's not going to help who it's intended to help. It all sounds good, just like college. What do we say? It's like theory. Works great on paper, works great in school. When you try to go with a practical application, it doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. And if you look at just $50 a month, by the way, that's $600 a year that you have to pay. Right now, your per hookup is something like $10 a month. It's a mandatory fee for being hooked up, and it fluctuates monthly. But even at 10, that's an additional $120. So you're at $720 plus a year in fixed fees. Please tell me again how it's going to go down. And just to what you said, by the way, if you look at your phone, company fees and surcharges, administration fee, federal universal service charge, regulatory cost recovery charge, state public utility surcharge, 911/988 surcharge, California Universal Service PPP charge. Was that the
I thought it was a CCP charge.
Payment protection plan? Are we paying extra for that? But anyway, that's just what is on my phone bill. And if you look at what's on your PG&E or your electric bill, in our case, when I called PG&E to talk about some of their numbers not adding up. They just basically talked around all their funny math, and you can never catch them. So too bad, so sad. I said, I know how much electricity I'm producing. I have an app that hooks up to my equipment, and I can see how much I'm producing, but they fudge the numbers every hour according to them. They plus and minus depending on what you're making and using. So then you can't actually see in a day what's going to PG&E and in a day what's, coming out. They do some funny math.
Yes, and they're the ones that came up with this creative system of what size kilowatt system you should go with, how you should grid tie it, or whether you should go with a hybrid system. And then now that they're finding that people are pumping a lot of power back into the grid and they don't want to pay you for it, that's why now we have a NIMS what?
3.
NIMS 3.
Yep. So they want to make sure that no matter what you do, you're in a deficit to them. And so if you do what they said you should do, you're also wrong. And the NIMS 3, they still want you paying like 80% of your bill. They don't want you to get away with not paying that. By 80% of your bill, I mean that whereas before they'd say, okay, you utilize this much electricity, you sent this much to the grid, it cancels each other out. Instead, they want to do only a percentage. So if you sent a kilowatt, they're only giving you credit for a percentage. And that's how they want to make sure that you have to pay no matter what.
And then if you try to go off grid,
they also want to stop you.
They want to stop you from doing that because they don't want you standing alone and taking care of yourself.
No, don't be responsible for yourself. You can't possibly do that. Gotta make you pay. Something that was brought up by my husband regarding that, he said, does it matter what your household size is? Both in how many people you have in your household. It's just based on income. It says nothing about, stepped up depending on how many people you have in your household. And also, does it matter your household square footage? And that it also appears to be a no. So if you are a single person living in 200 square feet, but you make good money, you're paying $92 a month. If you are a multifamily living in 3,000 square feet, it's still based on the income alone. It doesn't matter how big your place is or how big your family size is. So even if you tried to lessen your footprint, think small, be small, it's about your
income,
money, your income.
Yeah, good point. That's very interesting. I didn't think about that. One thing I did think about that we started to talk about last week was scuba diving.
Yes.
Submarines, mini subs, going to see wrecks. Well, unfortunately, we had a mini sub this past week that was lost at sea and imploded. And it was supposed to be new technology, but if you listen to folks that build these and people that are in the know, they should not have built a sub out of spun, I believe it was made out of Kevlar, going down to depths of 12,000 feet or more and not having the vessel inspected by an independent inspector to make sure that it was in fact safe. Well, apparently it had gone down to the Titanic 5 times. This was the 6th trip. So those spun subs are only good for 5 trips.
And I heard that the U.S. government, through technology, knew about the implosion pretty much when it happened.
Yes, we probably still have listening devices out in that part of the ocean. Or they had a sub somewhere that heard it.
And they did not say anything to the world until everybody was on pins and needles. Will it run out of air? Will they get to it in time? The story was, can they get to it and save it in time? There was a company out there who said they have the technology to basically grab it and pull it in. So if it's, say, stuck on the bottom of the floor, that their submersible had the ability to actually pick it up, or none of the others did. So please let us go out. And they denied that company the opportunity to go because it seems like they already knew, but they kept the world on pins and needles. And the story was, will they get to them before the air runs out?
Well, we always talk about conspiracy theories, and one of my coworkers today had a conspiracy theory.
And what is your coworker's conspiracy
What letter
theory?
was released while this was happening?
The one on Hunter Biden?
Yes. And that our office of the presidency was keeping this thing going, even though they already knew it had imploded, to create a vacuum and suck all the air out of the room, so to speak, so it would cover up the letter and people would focus on the lives in the submarine. Do I believe it? I don't think so. But here we go with the conspiracy theory. There's always a good one out there.
Well, their timing was impeccable.
Another conspiracy theory, or another portion of it, and I actually saw this on the news. Somehow somebody dug up info on this CEO and made the claim that he was a Republican donor.
Oh, they also said that the company was owned by Elon Musk, that Musk was responsible for it. So right away we heard Republican donor, we heard it was an Elon Musk company, but they also had him out there, a lawsuit that got dredged up claiming that safety issues were identified before they went out.
Yeah, so how about, let's look at it this way. Here you go. You ready? How about he was a man who had a dream. He became a billionaire, wanted to fulfill his dream, thinking that he was using modern technology to make things work safely and accurately. And he was maybe skirting the edge of safety, potentially. We don't know. He's dead. His business partner said he was very conscious about people's lives and safety. So we'll never know, or we'll know, but it's going to take a while before what? For all the data to come out.
Gotta wait for the rest of the information.
Yes.
We're doing this based on quick assessments that they're trying to get out.
Well, yeah, he was a Republican donor, and those were all Democrats down there. He was suicidal, so he decided that he was going to take out 4 people at once and himself. See, how ridiculous does it sound? Who cares who he was donating to politically? It's got nothing to do with it.
Right, but when they all donate to each other, it's no big deal because everybody does it. But as long as it's the wrong person doing the donating, hey, let's drag them. Just like the IRS whistleblower that's coming out about Hunter Biden and naming names of people involved. I heard recently that they're going to drag him through the mud. They will find if he once whistled at a girl and made her feel uncomfortable or ever sent out a missive in an email that is not acceptable in a workplace environment, that they're going to try to take him down because he's going after the wrong person.
Well, of course he will, because he or she might be potentially a truth teller, and these little demons down there don't want the truth.
So do you remember how Eric Adams came out, the mayor of New York City, talking about how terrible, horrible, and awful it was that Florida and Texas were busing and flying in migrants to his city?
I do. Is he relocating them?
Apparently he's been doing the same thing. So he resettled people who were not lawfully here, who had arrived in the Big Apple. He actually resettled people around the world, including to China. He said as a claim.
You mean he's no different than any of the others?
Correct. Apparently they were sent 114 migrant households, Adams, called Texas sending illegal immigrants to New York horrific. He sent 114 migrant households to over a dozen states and to 5 countries, including China, Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador.
So did he send them back to their countries of origin?
I don't know. I don't know if it was their countries. I mean, it'd be weird if he sent them to random countries.
Well, that's what I've always said I would do, just as a bad practical joke. Say, okay, you come over here illegally and you're from, Guatemala. I'm going to send you to Russia.
Yeah, so I guess they've spent over $50,000 in taxpayer money on flights from April to April, 2022 to 2023. And they actually sent some to Florida, to Texas, North Carolina, and Illinois as well. I just find that really interesting that the person who said this is horrible did the same thing. So I bet you some of them wanted to return. They thought that they were going to get job access right away, and it wasn't everything that they wanted it to be.
And I have news for a lot of them. Once they do get into the system and they start working and paying taxes and they can't afford their homes, they can't afford the PG&E, even though they're paying a set rate, and they're paying $5 a gallon for gas, they're not going to be very happy. Because it's all lollipops and roses until you actually have to start working the system.
'Tis true. This has been a podcast produced and edited by the Dirt Sailor duo. Mark and Shannon are a father-daughter team who both served in the United States Navy. This production is protected by copyright laws. Until next time, anchors away.